So first of all, Brendan, very nice to be here today with you. I'm Patrick Monnot. I'm the founder and the CEO of Pod. Pod is a pipeline intelligence platform for B2B salespeople. What we ultimately do is help reps prioritize the deals to focus on and how to close them faster. We help mostly account executive on their pipeline management skills to be able to make better, faster, and smarter decisions and ultimately crush their quota. And that's simple.
And obviously this market with like the introduction of AI, like this go-to-market sales is a huge popular thing, but typically you're hearing mixed reviews more on that like AI SDR.
Yeah.
From my experience working in RevOps, pipeline management is not the easiest way, but the most direct way of getting more revenue.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with this idea? Obviously your background's more consulting focused. Sales is like wrangling cats. It's a whole different industry. How did this come to be? Was it a problem or fate you saw, or how did this idea kind of get started in your own mind to help build it?
Yeah, so I think my journey as a founder, to your point, started in consulting. I worked at McKinsey for a few years. I started doing general work and very quickly started focusing a lot more on tech companies and a lot more on go-to-market and product. It was a bit more higher level, right? Is it how do the go-to-market teams function? How do you think about the next horizon of growth and working with the product team to bring it to life? And then after my stint of a few years in consulting, in the meantime, I moved to San Francisco, started working with tech startups specifically. So it started to give me a bit more of a sense of, well, how do startups work, right? What are the dilemmas they're facing? What are the challenges they're facing to grow and, unlock that next stage of growth or that next round? But so I had a good understanding at a high level, I guess, of go-to-market engines as a whole, which is great. And then I moved into a startup, Series C startup called Zinier, backed by some amazing investors, Excel, Founders Fund, et cetera, et cetera. And then jumped in a bit of a jack of all trade role, but spent a lot of time doing go-to-market ops and product. Sales was kind of the most important thing at that time. And then the CEO and I were like, Patrick, we need your help on the sales side. So I'd never done sales before. And I was basically working hand in hand with our AEs, thinking about sales enablement, doing intro pitches, qualification calls, et cetera, et cetera. So I got a very good sense of what our AEs workflow. And back then we were working in big enterprise contracts, between 3 and 9 month of sales cycle, $100,000 and more in ACV. I got a chance to understand, okay, what is the workflow? What does it mean to be an account executive? What are the challenges that they're facing? What are the tools that they're using? And there was a bit of a epiphany moment, because what I realized over time is there's a lot of guesswork when I was looking at account executive, a lot of guesswork. And even though you have processes and documentation and enablement, there's still a lot of guesswork when you sit side by side with an account executive and you try to think through pushing a deal forward. So the underlying problem that we saw, and forget about the technology and AI, the problem that I saw is account executives make mistakes and lose deals because they lack the know-how and the guidance to know how to push deals forward, right? And that's a huge problem because it's not just, I don't think it's their fault at the end of the day. They have 10, 15, 20 different tools and systems and data sources all over the place, and they lack coaching. That's the thing. If you're lucky, if you have 30 minutes a week with your manager to do proper coaching, if you have your pipeline review, it's most often in a grilling session. So I thought it was an interesting problem because it's not just a pure engineering problem where there is an answer, right? There's a clear answer. It is a mix of hard skills and soft skills, a behavioral challenge, and it's a productivity and efficiency and effectiveness problem all at once. So I think it was just a very interesting problem to solve. I had a chance to have firsthand experience into it. So I was like, hey, I think there's something to do here. It's an exciting market. And from the very beginning, you'll laugh at that one. From the very beginning, we were calling Pod an AI-powered workspace for account executives. Initially competing more directly with the Scratchpad of the world, with the Doodle of the world. But I remember AI has always been on our roadmap and something that we thought we could have and give AEs an edge around. And I remember some of the first investors I spoke to when I was fundraising my first pre-seed back in 2022. They said, "Oh, you should drop the AI. No one understands it, and you should, it's too confusing." So it's kind of interesting to see that back a year and a half, 2 years ago, 2 years and a half ago now, AI was not really a thing, or at least not recognized as much of a thing. It was more nebulous and vaporware. And now, fast forward 2 years, it's a lot more substance to it. So anyways, so that's kind of the journey of what brought me to build Pod to, it all started at the end of the day with a problem that I thought was exciting and that, to your point, was the most valuable for sales teams and account executives to solve.
And I think that's one great thing, especially when I sold products that were more sales focused, is because sales is directly to revenue. There is almost a one-to-one connection. It's a lot easier to sell that mission and vision, where if it's just efficiency side, and I worked in healthcare where it's like, hey, by improving mental health, you will lower sick days and productivity. Very vague to connect the dots. Everyone knows if you're a happy employee, you're more effective. But when someone says, what is the exact number? It's
a bit of
purely
a
guesswork. It's very much a leap. Even though everyone's like, it's good to be mentally healthy, it's harder to connect those dots. Where I always found on the sales front, if you can make sales reps more effective, it's 10% increase, 10% more revenue. It's very easy, or at least much more straightforward.
I'll push this even further, and it might be a hot take, but it's one I fundamentally believe, especially in what we're doing at Pod. Even in sales, in the past year and a half, you've seen an effervescence of AI sales tools, and they all do a bunch of different things in the sales flow. But a lot of them focus, to your point, on efficiency. So the two big use case you've seen, and you've probably seen dozens of companies going to go in this space. First one is email generation, whether it's sequences or drafting emails or reviewing emails. That's a big category. And then another category is kind of conversational intelligence, recording a call, looking at the transcript, and then either using that to update your Salesforce or your CRM or drafting a follow-up email. This is great. But again, I think that these use cases are ones that tackle an efficiency problem. Ultimately, what it helps reps to do is to spend less time on admin work. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a big unlock. If you're spending 3/4 of your day doing admin work, you're not going to sell. Definitely relevant. But to be able to say that by making reps more efficient, they're going to close more deals. I think this is where, similar to what you said, it's a leap of faith. It's a jump. It's not true. You could give reps 10 hours more a week that they can spend selling if they're either not spending time selling on the right deals or they're not selling the right way. It's pretty much wasted. So this is why I think fundamentally at Pod, not to throw Pod in there again, but the underlying problem is one that we're solving is one of effectiveness. It's like, let's get you to sell better, to sell smarter, because ultimately, to your point, if you follow up with the right people, if you engage the right stakeholders, if you know which deal you want to focus on, then you can believe that your conversion rate from one stage to another is going to improve. Your sales cycle is going to be shortened. And that's money in the bank at the end of the day. Anyways, I think that's a nuance. It's an interesting debate on efficiency versus effectiveness.
It's always super interesting, because that was always the idea of like, hey, we want the sales reps to spend more time selling. And then I worked in companies where like, hey, it's December, so it's like slow down month. They're just like working less. Like, it's one of those things, I think it's human nature. You assume, I'm just really busy right now. If I'm less busy, I'll have so much more time to focus on my work or read more. You end up just watching more TV 9 out of 10 times, unless you have a level of like, I know what I'm going to do next. These are the next steps I need to do, and kind of having a plan to attack. That's always, that's even in my life, it's always an excuse. I'm like, even in school, I have exams now. Actually, I'm going to go I'm going to start being healthy. I'm going to eat healthy. And then there's always another burden. So I've always learned, and someone once told me, it's like the idea that you always make time for what's important. And sometimes you are just too busy. It is true. But everyone can agree 9 out of 10 times, it's just a great excuse to be like, I have to do more admin work. And that's why I'm not selling more. And I've always found on the sales front side, like you're saying, the best sales reps always have an AEs have a method to their madness. There's like a steps they're following that's consistent and repeatable. And I think that's one thing in sales where this type of product and engineering is really being more effective, is figuring out how to develop a process reps can follow for more repeat success. Because that's something in sales that most other roles don't have, where you need to sell constantly and you can't take a month off because your numbers drop. So figuring out a repeatable thing. And sales is probably one of the most unique places where everyone has their own method of doing things. And there's no consistency, typically, from what I've seen. So it's a very interesting problem you're kind of trying to jump on and solve, at least, because it is a problem every rep has faced.
Yeah. And I think organization play a role in defining these guardrails or these frameworks. But I think it's important to let reps be able to play within that sandbox and find things that work for them. It has to be solving the right thing. I think it's important for forecasting, for onboarding to have RevOps or sales enablement be able to kind of throw the to show some guidance or to show, hey, these are some things that are important for us as an organization, but not become not a deterrent. I don't think it's the right word, but a blocker or a burden for account executives and sales reps to say, like, oh, well, I have to spend 5 hours doing this process, but it adds no value to me or to my ability to close deals. So I'm just not going to do it. So then everyone loses because manager's not happy, RevOps not happy, reps is annoyed because he can't do work that he likes. So I think it's all about like, how do you get reps? How do you balance both of them? How do you get reps to spend more time selling and giving them the tools to be able to structure their thoughts and framework to better prioritize? And yeah, I think that's the key of it, is the balance between both.
Yeah, and I think prioritization is probably the biggest thing of like, even on your website, it's that idea of like, okay, what do I do today? What are the steps I can take to get the best actions to help solve or close more deals? And I think that's something typically when I was a sales rep, even or even managing a sales team, helping figure out what is that best next action. What should you be working on? Now, what are those deals that are stalled that you can close today? And a lot of times, the messy playbook, the poor note taking, this is where it bites you in the butt because you don't know what course of action would be most effective to help move the deals forward. And I think that's really something enlightening that I've seen from like a poor sales team to a great sales team, is having an understanding of what tasks you should be doing to help you get better and get that coaching. Yeah. But again, I think coaching is always a challenge. And I think more and more now people are realizing they need more coaching. Yeah. Just due to the fact that competitive world out there.
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting as well is what do we define as coaching? I think that the reflex when we talk about coaching is meeting coaching. How are you, I don't know, talking about your product or services with a prospect? How do you do good qualification? How do you do good objection handling? All these things are very important. Don't get me wrong. I think this is why there's a lot of solutions out there that focus on kind of in-meeting enablement and guidance, etc. I think a big part of coaching, which is, well, obviously, which what we focus on, is like everything else, right? What do you actually do? What is the strategy of how you manage your pipeline? And I think it takes a lot of time and effort and experience to get to a point where you're a director of sales or a VP of sales. You've worked on thousands of deals. You have patterns that you identified across what actually moves the needle better, or what is the right way to prioritize a deal versus another. And I think that's the level of coaching that reps are lacking the most, right? Yes, you're going to have a call review every week with the team, and everyone's going to say, hey, how could you do this or that better? I think more and more organizations are doing that, which is great, which is perfect. But at the end of the day, it's Monday morning, 8 a.m., you're a rep in front of your pipeline, and you're like, what the hell should I do? Right. And that is also something that you can coach and teach and learn and become better at. I think that's the biggest thing, because at the end of the day, you could have the best the best pitching skills out there. If you're not talking to the right person, if you don't necessarily if you're spending time on a deal that is actually going nowhere, yes, you're practicing, but perhaps it's wasted to some extent. So prioritization, I think, is a big topic that is not talked about enough in my perspective. And I think people more and more are realizing that, because there's been so much focus on efficiency, to your point. Well, let's do more emails. Let's do more things. And then people are taking a step back, like, okay, well, let's not send 15,000 email. Yeah. Let's maybe focus on the ones that we think, let's use our resource in a more thoughtful way and prioritize better. So.
And I think, or I'm seeing that more and more, especially with the rise of RevOps being the highest hired role over these past 6 months. Yeah. And then sales enablement as well, finding reps or finding members who are more focused on figuring out best course of action, coaching the reps, figuring out, okay, pipeline management, which everyone hates to do, but it is, from my experience, one of the easiest ways to get more success is just having better data. But like you touched on, collecting things that are actually going to be recorded. A lot of times you had, I think it's like ebbs and flows. Before you collect everything, the CRM would have 75 fields. It would take you 1 hour to close one deal. Problem is no one fills it in, so it's useless. If you can't get clean data, collecting the information is useless. So it's kind of that move back to the, not MVP, but almost the minimum viable amount of data you have to use to help make the process easier to kind of move the deals forward.
Yeah.
You came from the world of consulting, and I talked to a lot of consultants, and being a founder and a consultant is almost the two extremes. One is very strategy, big picture, and then like kind of drop it and leave and kind of work on something else. And being a founder is process is great, but I have to do everything myself. You have to get into it. So who cares what's the best course of action? Things just need to get done.
Yeah.
When you kind of took, obviously you worked more closely with startups and worked that one.
Yeah.
Did you find that transition in your mind difficult, kind of going from maybe more of that big picture, best course of action to finding the most effective way of doing something that may not be best on paper? Was that hard, a mental transition, or were you just so used to looking at so many problems being a founder? Wasn't that unique to consulting? Because I always hear two different sides. It's always an interesting transition for sure.
I think it depends a lot on the person. I think there are people that are very, very comfortable in consulting and love it and add a lot of value. And I think that's obviously great, but they don't necessarily have a bias towards action or execution or doing things. So a transition to a space where there's a lot more ambiguity, there's no right answer. You don't have time to do a lot of research and create 50-page decks. That can be very unsettling. I think on the flip side for me, I think it was quite interesting and I don't want to say easy because it was definitely a learning process, especially when your first job out of college is consulting. You build a lot of patterns and ways of thinking. But to me, it was natural because I've always had that bias towards action to find a way. Let's get great. That's the great solution. But like, what can we do right now? And having both of these skills to some extent, so the ability to execute fast and the ability to take a step back, I think has ultimately been very helpful to me over time, because I think I have the balance of like being able to take a step back and thinking about what I'm doing in the context of a broader strategy or approach. And then, but also be able to see what is the tactical thing I can do right now that gets me closer to that goal. And when you're a startup, especially when you do product in a startup, you have to be able to balance that, or else you end up either spending a lot of time in the nitty-gritty details and you go in any type of direction, and so you're not moving towards your vision or towards your end goal, or you're spending so much time on getting that one feature out and it being perfect that you end up going to market and being super slowly. So I think it's ultimately, I think, helped me to be able to have that very balanced approach to start a building, to say like, oh, let's iterate fast. Let's take the time to step back, understand where we're going, but then stack that against, okay, what are the things that we can do this week that are quicker and dirtier, but at least we're aware of what we're sacrificing in the early days. I think I had people that are just in consulting working for big companies that might not work that muscle, but very quickly, even in McKinsey, I work with startups, with smaller companies, or surrounded myself with people that work from the startup environment. So I had a chance, I think, to be eased into that environment as well. I think it's been very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, everything is useful. Obviously, as you scale, having that rigor of assessing everything in a hopefully unemotional way as possible, just looking at the data and saying, okay, which is the best course of action. But then again, depending on your approach, like you said, it's like personal nature. Some people, I think everyone thinks startups are the best thing in the world because you watch a few TV shows, you got ping pong tables, it sounds great. And you think everyone's gonna be a millionaire overnight because you get that stock option and bam, you're buying a yacht. But in reality, I think for a lot of people realize, especially in that world, you can get paid very much being a consultant as well. And possibly for most on average, probably make more money. Because you're making so much money when you're young, you can just invest it. But again, I think, like you said, a lot of people have to have that conversation. Do you like that ambiguity? Because I know many people who love solving problems because there's a solution, almost that engineering mindset where there is a best case scenario. On the startup side, sometimes there actually is no best case because you're the first one doing it. So there is no literature to kind of go after. It's almost like that kind of transition. I think both are skillful, but having a self-reflection of realizing, do I enjoy this? And will I keep enjoying it? And maybe
Yeah.
for a lot of people I talk to, maybe when you get to Series A or Series B, where you need more of that, hey, there's a direction,
Yeah.
that's more for you. Where early seed funded stage, it is literally just throwing darts at the wall. Then hopefully with the rigor
Controlled
you've built,
chaos.
controlled chaos. I think
Yeah.
that's where consulting helps a lot, is helping control the chaos
Yeah.
so you don't repeat your mistakes.
Yeah.
But again, you have to kind of go into that chaos. So yeah, it's kind of interesting kind of hearing your perspective, seeing both of that extremely
Yeah.
rigored world versus more of the wild west of startups that still require obviously a lot of analysis, especially when you're going to market with a new product.
Having spent obviously a lot of time
Mhm.
hiring in the past, throughout my career, but in the past year and a half at Pod, I think it's one of the thing I ask in the first meeting, like, why do you want to go in startups? Right? Give me the
Yeah.
real answer here, because I think a lot of people are in love with the ideas of startup. Oh, it's super cool. Have a bunch of ownership. No one to tell me what I do, and I can wear a bunch of multiple hats, and that's true. And there's a lot of upside to it. And some people are kind of going after it for potentially the financial gain, which, look at it, there are more likely, there's a higher chance of not making anything than making something. But I push people to very, very honest with themselves to say, like, do you realize what it actually is at this early? It is not sexy. There's a lot of ups and downs, and there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of pushing fast, and high velocity decision making and execution, etc. And it's not sexy, and it's long days, and it's not if you want to make more money and then work 40 hours a week and not have to worry about anything else, a company is better for you. And even between the first 10 employees and being the employee number 50 in a Series A or Series B is completely different, as different as between 50 employees and 5,000 employees.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I like the point about, like, people being in love with the ideas of startups, but like when you get in there, you're like, holy moly, this is might be for me, and people thrive in it. I take a lot of energy from it. A lot of people, it's draining, because they like when there's predictability. They know exactly what to do when there's a process that is set. For them to a startup, you might have discussed something the day before. Now it's like, nope, we just learned something
Completely
new.
irrelevant. Yep.
Go in this direction. I think that's fun, but for some people, it's unsettling.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, I've also spoke to many founders who even said the same thing, like 0 to 5 employees, 5 to 15, 15 to 50, 50 to 200. And it all requires a different skill set. I know many founders who were the opposite. They love the early stage, but when they got to that Series A, they stopped enjoying it as much, because when you're making, $50, $100 million a year in revenue, you can't be adapting every day. There has to be some process, because there's money on the line now. And for some founders, they love the fact that now they've built through that stage, they can now really start being strategic, where others just want to, live that new idea ideation. They want that, like, randomness every day, because it's super exciting. Not like gambling, but to some extent there is a little bit more uncertainty. So again, it's also yourself being a founder, realizing, what do you actually enjoy and what skills do I have to develop? So I talked to a lot of founders where it's like, hey, once I got to 100 employees, I realized, oh, I need to learn how to lead and delegate. Where back it was all on me, and I love that. But now I need to learn how to develop these new skills, because me at the smaller size needs to be a different person than me at a big organization. I think that's always, that self-reflection is always important as you scale and grow.
Yeah, the company grows, the company evolves. I think yourself as a founder have to evolve as well. And sometimes it's ultimately, maybe you don't want to build that skill. Maybe you do, or maybe you're not good at it. And this is where when you get to a certain point, some founders have to step aside and be like, hey, well, having the self-awareness to say, hey, I'm not the best position to lead the company here. Let me bring a lifelong operator to get us to IPO or whatnot. You've seen that in many cases, but I think there are a lot of great examples, including the CEO of Airbnb, Ryan. I think they started the company when they were early 20s, or maybe 18 or 19, and they had everything to learn. But I listened to a podcast about a VC who worked with them. It's like, the guy just evolved. He was just always looking to improve, and he learned a lot along the way, but stayed in a position to be a leader for Airbnb. And I think that's also definitely possible. And I think something you have to raise your hat to. I think it's super cool.
For sure. You have to be able to enjoy the process, but also realize that there are things that you're not going to want to learn or enjoy, but to get to that next level, you may have to take some learnings that are not as exciting. So I think a lot of people maybe start, again, it's always that, is it a business or a lifestyle? Because some people start companies to have a lifestyle. They want to say they're a founder. But not that they don't want to work, but they only want to work on things they enjoy, but to really have a successful business. You might have to do customer success. You might have to do finance and fundraising, or be extroverted when you're an introverted person. I think that's kind of sometimes when I coach a lot of mentors or founders, that's like a thing where they have to realize that it's not always that sexy. There's not always that just working on fun ideas and brainstorming. If you love brainstorming, a lot of time it is just doing those actions that are, I spent 10 hours just calling customers. That's all I had to do today.
It is most often not sexy. It's just not always. It's like most often, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it is not sexy. When you raise a big round and you celebrate, or you're doing a team outing and everyone's happy, then it's sexy. Or when you close a first client, when you make money, like all that is make kind of the first money for the company. That's ecstatic, and the highs are super high, but the average is pretty much non-sexy, or at least not as non-sexy as any job can be.
And it's also fun. I've talked to many wealthy people, and a lot of times the industries they're in that make a lot of money are also not that exciting. They're like, oh, I'm in, I sell snow blowers, but I'm the biggest in the world. I make $500,000, $500 million a year. But you're like, oh, that's so niche. But like anything in life, there's money in everything. You just kind of have to be great at what you do. What kind of talking about non-sexy and sexy AI, as you talked about a little bit, like 5 years ago, funny enough, out of Montreal. So that's where I was kind of invented, which is always exciting to have Canada on the board for something. But nowadays, everything has AI in it. And like you said, you really built this product with focus on it. But then a lot of those products in the past, maybe were more vaporware. In your view, where is there a need for AI versus just adding it as an acronym with no use? Have you seen also speaking to other founders where it's being thrown in as not effective? In your mind, what is an effective way of using AI, and maybe what are some of the common pitfalls? Maybe new founders, when they want to add AI to everything, throw a chat GPT API integration into it, where it's not needed. Kind of what is that go, no go in your mind with integrating it?
I think AI is another tool to building technology, as trying to find that, I don't know, as internet was another tool to meet a need of the market. So I think there are a lot of companies out there who started with the technology and they're like, oh, here's this cool thing I can do with AI, and then try to reverse engineer and find a problem. And like ultimately the product was just AI, and they were like, okay, well, let's find somewhere to apply this without necessarily taking a lot of time thinking about the technology, very little time thinking about the customer's ideal customer profile, their needs, their pain points, the current solutions out there, status quo, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I think this is what led to a lot of vaporware, is technology that is not as differentiated as other people might think, and it's easy to just plug in with OpenAI and do a bit of prompt engineering and throw a bit of data, and that's not solving much of a problem. I think so that's, in my perspective, it could be a cool side project. It could be a cool little thing that you get. And then I think there are a lot of companies who did that, but they were early on and they had and are having great success. But I think majority of them are not differentiated, and also they're not, venture scale type of business where like, is this a company that is eventually going to get you to $1 million ARR? Probably not. So I think on the flip side, I think the big do's is forget about AI for a second, right? What is the pain point that you're solving? How can you solve it best? And in some cases, AI is the best way to solve it. But I was laughing with our machine learning engineers in the team, and obviously they're super sharp guys, and obviously they love AI. That's their bread and butter, so to speak. But we were working on a new use case that we're launching in the next few weeks. And the first thing that we did is like, well, what is the fastest way that we can deliver that use case? And the answer was like, let's just do some stats modeling, very basic, kind of relatively basic stuff, so to speak.
Yeah.
But like, it's not AI, it's just stats modeling. Let's take the numbers, let's look at statistic, let's use models, basic models, so to speak, and let's get something out there. And it's probably going to solve the problem, maybe not in the best way, but it's going to solve the problem. And later on in a future iteration, then that's when we can add some more robust, reliable, accurate AI models. But AI is just another tool amongst an arsenal of tools that are available to people building products to use. So I think that's the best approach. I think this is why a lot of articles on this, but this is why depending on the segment or the function or the industry that you're in, there's a big belief that, well, incumbents are going to win the AI race because at the end of the day, they're solving a problem and they can just use a different tool and iterate on their product and add AI to it, and it's going to solve it better. And a lot of companies are solving the exact same problems in an undifferentiated way. Whereas I think the companies who are going to come out of this winning, the AI companies at least, are the ones that are solving a unique, either solving a unique problem that is important and urgent, or finding a better way to solve that problem than what's out there. And it might or might not be using AI. So I think that's my framework of how I think about AI. And yes, it's great and it's sexy, but it's not. It's definitely far from being perfect, especially on the application layer. When you talk about infrastructure and foundational modeling, it's a whole different game. But I think this is the way to have to think about it. Like in any product, what problem are you solving? Is it an important problem? Is there a need for it? And how are you solving? What is the unique insight you have that helps you to solve it? Irrespective, the AI was not mentioned once in this sentence. So
I really think I've seen that many times. I was speaking to young founders. It's a red flag when they say, "I want to build an AI company," and then you're finding a problem to solve when it's. And one thing I would always do when people would come to me, because I work through Laurier and I help mentor their startups.
Yeah.
Well, I would ask the question, can you do this without AI? Like, what is AI being used for? And they're like, yeah, you can, but like AI is just cool, so we want to use it. And I'm like, that's fine, but like you said, a lot of times it's the trying to make a process. You're spending 20 hours to solve a 10-minute problem. Like, just solve the issue as easy as possible. AI might be the easiest way or the most effective way, but you have to first figure that out. What problem are you actually solving? I think similar to you, I found that being the biggest differentiator when is it actually being utilized to be more effective, or with a simple algorithm, even a recommendation where it's like, hey, whoever, just choose the best, don't need to import all this data. Is that more effective to kind of solve the key issues you're facing? And I think we're seeing that more and more now that I would say the hype for AI is down, but it has been overused so much. People are being a little more hesitant. Same blockchain, like 2 years ago, where everything was blockchain. When you're like, why can't you just use a centralized database? And the answer was always, well, you could, but it's cool to have it decentralized. And I'd always say, but you own the whole infrastructure. It is still centralized to you. And they'd be like, well, I guess technically that's true. I still own 100%. So it's one of those things where it's like that. In all startup world, it's like, when are the buzzwords relevant versus maybe just complicating the simple way to walk your dog? It's like AI dog walking apps. It's just a dog walking app. You don't need AI or blockchain to do this.
Unless it's all virtual and it's a Tamagotchi, and then
exactly. And then you get to the metaverse, and there are some uses, but it's one of those things like you're saying. I think anything in life is, are you solving a real problem, and is this the most effective way of doing it? And I think if you're solving a problem, you're going to make money. And I think that's one thing. Well, solving a problem people will pay for. But I think that's the key first. Starting impetus is the real problem you're solving.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why in many cases the founders who are most successful are ones that operated or lived the problem firsthand versus going out and trying to chase a problem and then ultimately not really understanding it. Because I think in order to create a unique, incredible product, you have to go deep into your understanding of like, what are the challenges and what are the alternatives, etc. So I agree 100% with you.
Mhm. And as we kind of get closer to wrapping up this podcast, I think one question I always like to ask is, obviously you've lived corporate life, startup life. Is there anything that you found a lot harder than you expected, or more challenging, more complex than you thought kind of going into this world? And on the other side, was there anything that was maybe not easier, but more simple than you thought, maybe from the outside world, than what it actually was? Were anything that come top of mind?
I think that the ambiguity in early stage startup is, you could be comfortable with it, but it's always a challenge. The ambiguity, especially as it pertains to where to spend time, what to prioritize. So talking about prioritization for sale, prioritization in product is probably the toughest part, because you're trying to figure out what is the best way to solve that problem and what you need to build, and you have a lot of input coming from everywhere, and prioritization is not clear. So that's the toughest part that you don't really, I think, oftentimes face, or as much or as acutely in a bigger
Mhm.
company. And then I think the other thing is, which is challenging, but I think this is where like we were talking about earlier, where your gut as a product person has to come in, but you have incomplete data points
Mhm.
about pretty much everything, until you get to the point where you have hundreds of daily active users on your platform, and you can look at a chart and be like, okay, well, I can use statistics to identify which feature is used, and etc. A lot of that is you have to piecemeal feed qualitative and quantitative feedback coming from a bunch of places, and taking all that in together and saying, okay, well, based on this information, this is the decision I'm going to make. I think that's the toughest part. The toughest, or not the toughest part, because my perspective, is the most fun part of
Mhm.
early stage product building and company building, but definitely not something that you're exposed to a
Yeah,
lot.
you'd have experienced before anywhere else, really.
You go in a big company, you're like, we need feedback. Okay, we'll drop $10,000 and do a survey for 1,000
Mhm.
people, and that's it. Problem solved. Whereas you can't really do that, or you cannot do that as easily in a big company, in a small company. Sorry. Um, the most, the easiest part of early stage startup is no politics, no BS. I am allergic to bullshit, allergic to politics, and this is one of the things that I don't think I was doing very well in bigger company. But I think in early stage company, if you have the right, doesn't mean that early stage company don't have politics, but
Mhm.
it's more dependent on you as a founder and whether or not you want to accept it to be the case. And I have a zero patience policy for this, but I think it's no BS. It's straight to the point. Say it how it is. We're not tiptoeing. It's not about
Mhm.
managing, or managing someone's ego, or someone's trying to promote itself more than another. Uh, it's all about like, what is the information we need for the greatest success of the company. The company is the only thing
Mhm.
that matters here. Uh, Whoever comes up with the idea, we don't care. And it's
Mhm.
funny, early on when we had some new people
Mhm.
onboarding into the company, new employees, one of the first things that I say is, there is no toe stepping on this.
Mhm.
If you have an obligation to dissent, which is a core value in consulting and McKinsey, but you
Mhm.
have the obligation to dissent. There's no toe stepping. If you think that something is done today and it's wrong, and you have good reason to think there is another way to do this, I don't care whether that person gets offended or not. There's no ego. There's
Mhm.
no place for ego. There's no toe stepping. So uh, that's, to me, is the easiest
Mhm.
part, and I guess one of the part that I enjoyed most about startups, that I hated the most about bigger company, where bigger company, in order to get a decision made, you have to syndicate with and socialize with 5 different people and
Yeah.
make sure everyone's on board, and you're just wasting time rather than adding value directly. So yeah.
Mhm. And I always find that funny, because a lot of people speak about the positives of having no bureaucracy and no politics. But for a lot of people, I think there is a safety in politics, because if you have tenure, you have some protection.
Yeah,
In a startup, I've also seen it where a lot of people think they want no politics. And obviously, there's bad politics.
for
But
sure.
it's also nice to sometimes have a barrier of being like, hey, I have had past success. I don't maybe have to not work as hard, but like there is some loyalty I have. But in a startup, you might have, you might have been a VP for many years. You come to a start, and people, junior people who are in their 20s and you're in 50, are just telling you you're wrong. I
Yeah.
think that's also a mind shift for some people, that they just not don't enjoy, but it's just that different level of I don't know, competitiveness, but you're always on mentality where there's always a way of thinking of something better. And for some that can be draining, but for others, like you're saying, it's exciting to find the core solution and really being able to solve it. Not have to, you know, I always found one issue when companies scale is like you have to start thinking about your career and then the company second. Like, hey, I know this thing's wrong, but if I go to this person and say it, then I can maybe get that promotion. And it is very much like life at a big organization. And I think at a certain scale you have to, but again, some people love it, some people hate it, but it's really good feedback. So I've seen that same thing on my front. And on the challenge, I think on the challenging side, you hit the nail on the head is everyone thinks they like ambiguity because it's exciting, but it is very weird going to a job and realizing like, what am I supposed to do today? And the answer is, I don't know. Like
figure it out.
And it is wild to just have like no real, like you have ideas, but there's no real like tasks for the day. And I think what's really funny, obviously with Pod, is like you're building that from the sales rep side, you're building on that process of like, there was a process now I can follow. I know my next steps. So
I think in startup, and sorry, one last thing is I think in startups, even for people that are going back to your point about the difference between a Series A, Series B, and a C stage or first 5-10 employees is that, you know, the sense of initiatives and saying like, hey, do we all agree with, are we all aligned on the mission or the objectives or the milestone? If we are, then figure out a way to get there, right? And no one's going to tell you what to do next. Take the initiatives and go beyond. And it's applied both to what you're doing from a product engineering or go-to-market perspective, but also from a company building perspective. It's like, hey, it's your company to some extent. You want to do a social event and to play chess or to play water polo, whatever that might be, go ahead, do it, right? Take the initiative. Don't ask for, you know, permission, ask for forgiveness at the end of the day. And that's something that I look for in all my team members. And that's a big sign for me of having an entrepreneurial mindset. Like, hey, just go ahead and do it. And yeah, get approval if you need along the way, but I don't want to have to push you. Like, go ahead, run with it. And that's, I think that's exciting when you surround yourself with people that have that same mindset. This is when you get things done quickly and in a good way. And I think that's very rewarding and good for the company.
Yeah. It's, what's called bias towards action is so important. And like anything, especially in the early stage. But again, I think there's also that line. And what's interesting, obviously, with your background, like in the consulting world, is there's also a bias towards not being strategic sometimes as well. Because I know a lot of founders are like, I always do stuff. It's always action. But again, you can also be running yourself in a circle where it's just biased towards action. But I do think on average, more people are hesitant towards action. So I think it's always fair to say bias towards action is the right way to go. In some rare cases, you have someone who just loves to do a new thing every day, and you have to tell them, hey, focus. I've mentored some founders who are like that, where it's every day there's a new project. And you're like, okay, you're too action focused. You have to take a step back and make a plan here. And that's very rare. That's very rare.
It's the difference between grind and smart grind. Someone told me that 2 weeks ago. It's like, you need a smart grinder. You don't just need a brainless grinder who's going to do things. Someone who take just a bit of time to think about what they're doing and then do it. So
so I guess as we wrap up here, if people want to learn more about your story or learn more about Podcast, what's the best way to get in contact? What's the website? So we can share it out there.
Absolutely. So website is workwithpod.com. There's a lot of information out there. We have a blog and resource section. And the great thing about Pod is that any sales rep today using Salesforce can go in there and sign up and get started for free. We have a free version that we think is pretty generous. So jump on it while you can. And then other than that, as you know, as a founder, I really like to be active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Patrick Monnot on LinkedIn. And I try to post and share my experience as a founder, as a product person, reflect on the world of sales, some of the, you know, relationships I build with sales leaders, etc. So if you want, you know, to hear a bit more information or follow along on our journey, LinkedIn is also a great place to find us.